You're listening to the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. It's fast, fun, free, daily deep dive Bible, and right now we're working on the book of Nehemiah. If you're new, welcome. You can jump in right here, or you can always go back and start at the beginning of any season. The whole podcast is available in an easy-to-use format at thetmbh.com.
I can think of a couple times in my life when we had tragedy and profound grief right next to celebration, joy, happiness. And that sound you hear in the background is my cat, by the way. He's very needy. We moved yesterday, and he doesn't want to be apart from me. So he's scratching at the door and making meowing sounds. And the only solution is to simply let him in here and allow him to do what he will do. So we might hear from him as the conversation goes along. That move went really well, by the way. A whole bunch of people showed up, people I know, people I really don't know very well, a bunch of high school kids. In the same way that we're talking about a passage here where people's hearts became soft, that's what happened to me yesterday. It affected me. It changed me, the way people showed up and helped. The simple act of helping us with a move that on paper isn't that big a deal, but has been a point of stress and attention for me. It was a really meaningful day, really cool. My cat doesn't understand how meaningful that was, though. So emotionally, he hasn't received that softening effect on his heart. He just had all of his favorite hiding places taken away, and I think he's confused and flustered and just needs to be around me right now. Anyways, remember what I was talking about at the beginning, the Bible stuff and everything that we were going to talk about? I was talking about grief and joy being right next to each other. I can think of moments where I've watched families welcome a new life into the world as they say goodbye on the same day to someone they've known and loved in their family. What a jarring thing to have this celebration of life on both the front and the back end on the same day. I have seen people have celebrations because of the rhythm of the year on one day and they have to grieve something deeply, a loss, on the very next day. It's kind of strange when you put those things right up next to each other. But the religious calendar for the ancient Jewish people, and I suppose modern Jewish people as well, that we see here in the Old Testament, it sort of crams these emotions right next to each other in their real thick holiday season. Now, in my country, the holiday season is Thanksgiving, and then you get all of the Christmas shopping season, and you got Christmas. And then you have Christmas is a 7-day holiday now, by the way. We just shut it down for a week. And then you got New Year's. Those are the three big ones. It's a very unique time of year. Everything feels very different that time of year. It's a holiday season. Well, this is their holiday season. In the fall, you've got three big holidays. Hey, pal, you okay over there? You can hop up here. It's okay. Did you hear his bell? Very needy. Well, the ancient Jewish holiday season is all stacked up in the fall time of year. But these holidays, they don't all have the same vibe. Some of it's really celebratory. Some of it's very reflective. The Day of Atonement falls in there. That's the big one. That's the one where so much of the stuff that's gone wrong all year, you're trying to account for that and somehow make atonement, make that right with God through sacrificial dance steps and things that are involved with that. And that particular holiday is very top-heavy in terms of the priesthood doing a lot of the work, special sacrifices. That's a very important holiday where some very important people, priests, Levites, temple servants, are all working together, working overtime to do all the things that they're supposed to do on behalf of the people. But then you get the Feast of Booths that you and I have been looking at through Nehemiah chapter 8, and that is obviously very participatory. You make a tent city, then you get the choice food and the choice drink and all of that, and you do it for a week, and it's celebratory and it's fun. But tonally, these are very different, right? Like one is a deep reflection on your shortcoming and failure, and then that is chased with celebration, usually. But sometimes the circumstances of life mingle the celebration and the regret and dealing with what went wrong in weird ways. They happen out of order. You don't get to deal with the tough stuff and then celebrate that you dealt with it every time. Sometimes it plays out a little bit differently, and that's what's happening here. The Day of Atonement, as many astute people over the centuries have noted, gets skipped over. It doesn't get touched on at all in Nehemiah. And that's kind of odd to leave that out because it is such an important holiday in this fall holiday season. And I think the answer for why it doesn't come up in Nehemiah is really simple. It doesn't come up because it isn't a super participatory holiday, at least as it was celebrated at this time. It was a very top-heavy holiday. And what we're reading about in Nehemiah is a very participatory religious revival, a mass softening of hearts and responsiveness to the law of God. So to me, it's not weird or problematic at all that the Day of Atonement seems to happen off screen somewhere just right before Nehemiah chapter 8, and that the Feast of Booths is the thing that is reflective of the vibe of the moment, of that celebratory vibe. But what's interesting too is people seem to want to do the Feast of Booths in chapter 8, which is very celebratory, with more Day of Atonement vibe, sackcloth and ashes, regret for what's gone wrong. And that's what they're reading about in the text. And so Ezra and Nehemiah and the Levites have to be like, whoa, there'll be a time for grieving or whatever, but now's not the time we're going to do it. And you remember this, we've talked about it. It's in Nehemiah chapter 8, where Nehemiah says, this day is sacred to the Lord your God. Don't mourn or weep. For all the people have been weeping as they listen to the words of the law. And then Nehemiah says, go and enjoy choice foods and sweet drinks and send some to those who have nothing prepared. This day is sacred to the Lord. Don't grieve, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. And then the Levites chime in and they say, be still, for this is a sacred day. Don't grieve. So they really had to talk the people out of putting the Day of Atonement tone over the top of the Feast of Booths, and apparently the people listened. And so when they got their choice food and drinks, as we read, and they lived in the tents, and they had a great time. But then as we pivot from chapter 8 to chapter 9, now the tone is shifted because it is time for a day of great repentance. A little out of order, a little different, but sometimes that happens in life, as we discussed. You can't always pick when the grief happens and when the celebration happens. And here's how that sounds, Nehemiah 9:1. On the 24th day of the same month, the Israelites gathered together, fasting and wearing sackcloth and having dust on their heads. They're imitating what they've seen from their leaders, Ezra and Nehemiah. Ezra, you'll recall, what was that? Ezra chapter 9, 8, something like that. He did that performative public grief, looks like it's 9, where he made it clear, I'm a mess over this. This is a disaster. It looks like it happens into chapter 10 as well. And people start gathering around and they're like, Ezra, why are you dressed like that? Why does your beard look like that? You look really bad, man. What's going on? And then he gives his prayer of confession. I haven't got it right. We haven't got it right. We've got to get it right. And there's this revival that comes on the back end of that. We'll talk about the relationship between that revival in Ezra and the revival we're reading about here in Nehemiah sometime in the next few days. But stuff changes coming out of it. And Nehemiah chapter 1, we've talked about this how many times, that prayer right there. It's the same structure. I'm a mess. My fathers have been a mess. Forgive us for all of the mess. Now we need to take action. Something needs to change. That's indeed what he goes and does with all of it. And really, everything we're reading about in Nehemiah comes out of that. There's the actions that flow out of it. So now it might be out of order, but we're into the regret part of the holiday season. It's almost like the people are now living out the intended tone of the Day of Atonement, which again is neglected in the account here in Nehemiah, but they're living this out after the Feast of Celebration, the Feast of Tabernacles. And it's time for them, it would appear, if this follows the same rhythm that we've seen in the life of Ezra and we've seen in the life of Nehemiah, the attentive reader should expect that now it's their turn to offer a prayer of repentance and confession for themselves and for their forefathers, and to reorient themselves to this new thing in a very public way, to orient themselves toward action, to have their hearts that have been softened by an awareness of their own shortcomings and a gratitude for God's forgiveness and restoration, to have all of that be funneled and channeled into new action, a new orientation, a new way of thinking about who they are and their relationship with God and what they want the world and their lives to look like moving forward. And indeed, that's what we're going to get as we move forward here in Nehemiah chapter 9. So it's a really odd mingling in these two chapters of grief and regret and repentance, and also celebration and optimism and action. And as we work through chapter 9, we're going to see how those things mingle together and what the next step of that looks like. And now it is time for me to go and to provide emotional nourishment and care to my cat, who apparently needs things like that. I mean, one of the features of a cat is they're supposed to be so emotionally durable that they don't need that kind of coddling. But you know what? He's been a good and faithful friend to me. And if he needs to be flipped over and to have his little vest and his little belly scratched a little bit to make him feel better, I think we can do that. Okay, more Nehemiah chapter 9 next time around. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Thank you to everybody who helped me move. Let's do this again soon.